I found a forum on the dark web discussing my daily life. They're predicting what I'll do next. Alright, so before I start this, I just want to say that I know how all this is going to sound. Like, yeah, people throw around the dark web in creepy stories, and everyone's first thought is, oh, another deep web horror story, right? But this isn't a story. It's real, and it's happening to me. A few months ago, my life was boring. I had a 9-to-5 job at some bland office, nothing special. My routine was the same every day. Wake up, get dressed, work, eat, sleep, repeat. The only real excitement I got was messing around on the internet after work, and sometimes I'd get curious and wander into the weird corners of the web. Not too deep, though. I'm not one of those people who'll jump into sketchy stuff for the hell of it. But one night, I was feeling a little more daring than usual. I've read about the dark web a ton. You know, how it's mostly just a lot of shady deals, black markets, and people being weird. But I always thought it was mostly just hype, so I figured why not? I was bored, it was late, and after a few too many beers I thought I'd see what the big deal was. So I did what any stupid bored person would do. I downloaded Tor. Now, getting into the dark web isn't hard. A few clicks, and I was in. At first, it was honestly underwhelming. Most of it looked like old, janky websites straight out of the 90s. The kind of sites you'd expect to crash your computer just from looking at them. I browsed around a bit, clicked on some sketchy forums, but nothing really grabbed my attention. Then I saw something that made me stop. It was a forum, buried in a list of other sites. The description just said, "Life Observations." That alone wasn't weird, but it was the little blurb underneath that caught my eye. It said, "We see you. We know you. Join us." Okay, yeah, creepy, but also intriguing. I clicked it. The page loaded slow, and when it finally did, I was greeted with a simple black screen and a single chat window. There were posts like a normal forum, but no usernames, just a bunch of dates and times. As I scrolled, the posts got more specific. At first it was generic stuff like, "You will leave your house at 8:07 a.m. or "You'll have coffee black, no sugar." Stuff that could apply to anyone, right? But then the posts started getting weirdly detailed. One post read, "You'll spill coffee on your white shirt tomorrow around 9:13 a.m. You'll curse under your breath and no one will notice." That caught my attention. Why? Because I had spilled coffee on my shirt the day before. Same time, same reaction, same indifference from everyone around me. I scrolled further, my heart starting to beat a little faster now. Another post. "You'll be late to work next Monday because of a flat tire. You'll call your boss and lie about traffic." I didn't have a flat tire, yet, but I had lied about being late because of traffic on that exact day. Now, I'm not one to believe in coincidences, but this was freaking me out. I wanted to stop reading, but my curiosity got the better of me. The posts kept going, and they were all describing little moments from my life. Stuff that no one else could know. Like the time I bought ice cream at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. Or how I took the long way home to avoid an ex. Random private stuff. Then I saw one that made my stomach drop. "Tonight, you'll visit this forum. You'll be drinking beer and thinking about how boring your life is. You'll stay longer than you should." I glanced at the beer in my hand, the bottle suddenly feeling heavy, like I didn't even want to touch it anymore. My first thought was that this had to be some sick prank. Maybe one of my friends hacked into my computer and was messing with me. I mean, it's 2024. People do this kind of thing for fun, right? But none of my friends are this tech savvy. And the level of detail in the posts, it was impossible for anyone to know these things. I kept scrolling. The posts weren't just about stuff I had done. They started predicting things. Small things at first, like, "You'll eat pizza tomorrow." Simple. Harmless. But then, as I scrolled further down, the predictions got more specific, more unsettling. "You'll get a phone call from your mom on Wednesday. She'll sound worried, but won't say why. you'll shrug it off. That one hit hard. My mom did call me last Wednesday, and she did sound off. I even joked with her about it, asking if she was watching too many crime shows. But the forum knew. Somehow, it knew. That's when I decided I needed to leave the site. I clicked the back button, but nothing happened. The page was frozen. I tried to close the browser, but my computer wouldn't respond. The forum stayed on the screen, the chat window flickering like it was waiting for me to do something. That's when a new message popped up at the top of the screen. "We know you're scared. Stay. You won't want to miss what happens next." I shut my laptop and nearly threw it across the room. My heart was pounding. This wasn't just creepy anymore. This was personal. It felt like the forum was watching me, like it knew me. But I couldn't stay away. I wish I could say I stayed away after that. I wish I had the sense to just forget about it, close the laptop for good, and move on. But that forum, it burrowed into my brain like a splinter. I couldn't shake it, the way it knew those tiny private details. It was like someone was watching me, following me, and I needed to know how. I mean, wouldn't you? The next few days were rough. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I told myself it was some elaborate hoax, maybe a coincidence. But as the days went by, the things I'd read on that forum started coming true. Every little prediction, like clockwork. First, it was the pizza. I wasn't even planning to get pizza that day, but my buddy at work convinced me to go out for lunch. Guess what we ordered? It shouldn't have been a big deal, right? Everyone eats pizza. But it wasn't just pizza. It was that feeling of inevitability. Like, no matter what I did, the forum already knew. Next was the phone call from my mom. It happened exactly like the post said. She called me out of the blue, her voice tight with worry. I asked her what was up, but she wouldn't say. She just told me to take care of myself. I brushed it off at the time, but after the call, I couldn't stop thinking about that post. It knew. How did it know? By this point, I was checking over my shoulder constantly, convinced I was being watched. I searched my apartment for hidden cameras, spyware, anything that might explain how they were tracking me, but I found nothing. I even started being weirdly cautious when I went out, trying to change up my routine, different routes to work, different coffee shops, but it didn't matter. The predictions kept coming true. The final straw, that flat tire. It happened the following Monday, just like the forum had said. I went out to my car, and there it was, a fat nail sticking out of my front tire, completely flat. I stood there staring at it for a full minute, my mind racing. I couldn't help but think about the post. It had predicted this days ago. And what did I do? Exactly what it said. I called my boss, lied about traffic, and got to work late. I didn't even try to change the outcome like I was on autopilot. By now, I was freaking out. Something was really, really wrong, and I had no idea what to do. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop thinking about it, but the other part, the part that couldn't stand not knowing, that part wanted answers. So, like an idiot, I went back to the forum. It was late, maybe 1 or 2 a.m. My apartment was dead silent, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. When I logged in, the first thing I noticed was that the posts were still there, waiting for me, as if the forum knew I'd come back. But this time, there were new messages. I scrolled down, my stomach sinking with every line. The new posts were even more specific than before. No vague predictions or harmless coincidences. This was personal, too personal. You'll sit at your desk, reading this at 1:34 a.m. Your heart will race, and you'll wonder if it's all in your head. I looked at the clock. 1:34 a.m. exactly. My heart was hammering in my chest. How could they possibly know that? The next post. You'll think about closing the laptop, but you won't. You'll keep reading even though you're terrified. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was like the forum was inside my head, reading my thoughts. I hovered my finger over the power button, but I didn't press it. I kept scrolling. I couldn't stop myself. Then, the posts got darker. Tomorrow you'll see a man watching you. You won't recognize him, but he'll know you. Don't approach him. Don't speak to him. My breath hitched. A man? Watching me? Who the hell was this guy? I clicked on the post, hoping for some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. Just the same blank screen with those eerie predictions. I closed the laptop and paced around my apartment, trying to make sense of it. There was no way this was real. No way some random website on the dark web was predicting my life with this kind of detail. But part of me knew this wasn't random. This was targeted. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew my every move. And I was too deep to turn back. The next morning I was on edge. I didn't sleep much after reading that last post, and every person I passed on the street seemed suspicious. Every guy I saw out of the corner of my eye felt like a potential stalker. I couldn't stop looking around, my paranoia at an all-time high. Then, as I was walking to work, I saw him. He was standing on the corner, just across the street from my building. I almost didn't notice him at first, but something about the way he was standing there, too still, caught my attention. He wasn't doing anything, just staring. Not at me specifically, but at my general direction. He looked normal enough, dressed in a dark coat, hands in his pockets. But there was something off about him. The way he just stood there, not moving, not interacting with anyone, it gave me the creeps. I remembered the post. Don't approach him. Don't speak to him. I kept walking. I didn't look back. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Who was he? Why was he there? The longer I thought about it, the more anxious I became. Was he part of this? Was he watching me for the forum? I wanted answers, but at the same time, I was terrified of finding out. By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted, mentally and physically. I kept expecting to see him again, but thankfully he was gone. Still, I felt no relief. It felt like something terrible was coming. Something worse than all the creepy predictions and flat tires. That night I logged onto the forum again, dreading what I'd find. And sure enough, there was a new message waiting for me. It was short, simple, and to the point. Tomorrow, it escalates. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry, heart pounding. Escalates? What the hell did that mean? I had no idea what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. The next morning, I woke up in a haze. My brain was still foggy from the lack of sleep, but that message was burned into my mind. Tomorrow it escalates. It was like a countdown had been set in motion, and I didn't know when or how it was going to go off. Every minute that passed felt heavier, like something terrible was just around the corner, waiting to strike. I tried to keep myself together as I got ready for work, but my nerves were shot. Every sound, every movement outside my apartment made me jump. Even the creak of my floorboards felt too loud. I kept telling myself that maybe it was all in my head, that the forum was just a sick game designed to mess with me. But that didn't stop the paranoia from creeping in. I left my apartment half expecting to see that man again, the one from yesterday. I scanned the street, every shadow, every corner, but there was no sign of him. Still, the feeling of being watched never left. It clung to me, like an invisible presence just outside my line of sight. The day dragged on, painfully slow. Every little thing felt off, like I was waiting for the punchline to some terrible joke. I couldn't focus at work. My coworkers noticed. One even asked if I was okay, but I brushed it off, saying I hadn't slept well. How could I explain any of this without sounding completely insane? By lunchtime, I was a wreck. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message or a call or something that would signal the escalation the forum had promised. But nothing came. The silence was almost worse than anything that could have happened. I was just left there, waiting, with my own fear eating me alive. And then, around 3 p.m., something happened. I was in the break room trying to distract myself with coffee when my phone buzzed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just a spam message or a notification from one of my apps. But when I pulled my phone out, I saw it wasn't any of that. It was an email. I didn't recognize the sender. It was just a string of random letters and numbers. The subject line was blank. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every rational part of me knew not to open it, but I couldn't help it. I tapped on it, and the email opened. There was only one sentence. "We're watching you." My stomach dropped. I looked around the break room, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Was someone in here with me watching right now? I quickly left the room, trying to keep my cool as I made my way back to my desk. My hands were shaking. I could barely think straight. Back at my desk, I checked my email again, hoping maybe I'd imagined it. But the message was still there, sitting in my inbox like a ticking time bomb. I deleted it immediately, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. Whoever had sent it knew me, knew what I was doing. And the timing, it was too perfect. I couldn't stay at work after that. I made up some excuse about feeling sick and left early. The whole way home, I felt like I was being followed. I kept glancing behind me, convinced that someone was just out of sight, watching, waiting. When I got home, I locked the door and pulled the curtain shut, feeling like a trapped animal. I was done playing along. I needed answers. I opened my laptop and went back to the forum. The site loaded slower than usual, almost like it was hesitating. When it finally appeared, there was a new message waiting for me at the top of the page. My heart sank as I read it. "You'll come back. You always come back. It's in your nature." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. How could they know? How could they be so sure that I would come back to the forum, even after everything that had happened? It was like they were inside my head, controlling my every move. But that wasn't the worst part. Beneath the message was a new thread. This one was different. It wasn't like the others with vague predictions or casual observations. No, this thread had a title: "Your house, right now." I froze. My house? What the hell was going on? I clicked on the thread, my pulse pounding in my ears. The thread opened to a single post. No usernames, no timestamps, just a message. "There's someone outside your window." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went cold. Without thinking, I stood up from my chair and walked to the window. My apartment was on the second floor, and from where I stood, I could see the street below. It looked normal. People walking by, cars passing. But then my eyes landed on someone standing across the street. It was him, the same man from before, the one I'd seen standing on the corner near my building. He wasn't staring up at my window, not directly, but he was there, just standing, like he was waiting for something. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. This couldn't be real. There was no way the forum knew what was happening outside my house in real time. It wasn't possible. But the man was there. I rushed back to my laptop, my fingers shaking as I refreshed the page. The thread had a new message. "Don't call the police. It won't help." My breath caught in my throat. They knew. They knew what I was thinking, what I was planning to do. I was trapped, completely and utterly trapped. Then, another post appeared, and this one hit me harder than anything else I'd read. "Tonight, we come inside." I slammed my laptop shut, my mind racing. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay in my apartment. If that man was still out there, waiting, then the forum's prediction could come true. But if I left, where would I even go? I felt like a mouse being toyed with, like they already knew every move I was going to make before I even made it. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and ran to the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. Just as I was about to step outside, I hesitated. Something in the back of my mind told me to check the window one last time. I turned around, heart in my throat, and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek through. My stomach dropped. The man wasn't across the street anymore. He was standing right outside my building. I froze at the window, barely breathing. He was standing right there, just a few feet away from my front door. The same man, dark coat, hands in his pockets, that unnerving stillness. It was like he wasn't even real, just a shadow in the shape of a man, waiting for me to make the next move. I ducked away from the window, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no way this could be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank, right? I mean, maybe someone was messing with me, watching my every move and feeding it back to me through that forum. But how? The level of detail was impossible, too exact, too perfect. I leaned against the door, trying to think. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But where would I go? I was trapped. If I stayed inside, I had no idea what this guy planned to do. But if I went out there, I didn't want to think about it. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking as I dialed 911. Screw what the forum said about not calling the police. This was real. There was a guy standing right outside my building, and I needed help. The phone rang once, twice. Then it clicked, and I heard the operator's voice. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could get a word out, the call cut off. My phone screen went black. I stared at it in disbelief. I tried turning it back on, but nothing happened. The battery was full just minutes ago. Now, it was dead. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first, I thought they were coming from outside. But no. They were inside the building, just outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking calmly down the hallway. My blood ran cold. He was in the building. I pressed my ear to the door, listening as the footsteps got closer, closer. Then they stopped, right outside my door. I backed away, my pulse thundering in my chest. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp from the corner of the room, and held it like a weapon. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I stood there, waiting, staring at the door, expecting him to break it down any second. But nothing happened. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I couldn't hear a thing, not even his breathing. It was like he wasn't there anymore, but I knew better. He was there, waiting, the same way he'd been waiting across the street, watching me, tracking my every move. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. There had to be another way out. I lived on the second floor, so jumping out the window wasn't exactly an option, but maybe I could slip out the back of the building. If I was quiet enough, I could avoid him. I crept toward the window, careful not to make a sound, and peered out. The street looked empty now. No sign of the man outside, but that didn't comfort me. The real threat wasn't out there anymore. It was inside. As I turned back from the window, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A quiet, metallic click. It was the door. I watched in horror as the handle began to turn, slowly, like someone was testing it. I gripped the lamp tighter, my knuckles white. The door wasn't locked. I had been too panicked when I ran to it earlier, too distracted to lock it. Now I was staring at the handle, watching it twist ever so slightly, as if the person on the other side was waiting for me to make a move. Then, the door creaked open. Just a crack, barely enough to see through. I could make out a sliver of darkness beyond it, the hallway light spilling in. But no one stepped through. No one forced their way in. The door just hung there, half open, like an invitation. I stood frozen, my breath shallow. Every part of me screamed to run, to get out, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't bring myself to move. I just stared at that crack in the door, waiting for something to happen. Then a voice broke the silence. It was low, almost a whisper, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Come on. We've been waiting for you." I didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't the man I'd seen outside. This was someone else. Someone who sounded calm, patient, like they had all the time in the world. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door didn't move. The voice didn't speak again. Just that same terrifying silence, hanging in the air like a noose. I needed to get out. I darted toward the window, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't care about the height anymore. Anything was better than staying here. I shoved the window open, my hands trembling, and looked down at the street below. 2 stories. It wasn't a fatal drop, but it was enough to hurt. Still, better broken bones than whatever was waiting for me. But as I swung one leg over the windowsill, I heard it again. That voice. "You can't run. We'll always find you." It was so close, like it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I threw myself out of the window, bracing for impact as I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my ankle, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I stumbled to my feet, limping down the alley, away from my building, away from that voice. The streets were empty, eerily quiet for this time of night. I didn't care. I just kept running, forcing myself to move, every step a painful reminder that I was still alive, still being hunted. I don't know how far I ran. Maybe a few blocks, maybe more. I lost track of time, my only goal being to get as far away from that place as possible. Eventually, I ducked into a convenience store, collapsing in one of the aisles, trying to catch my breath. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, buzzing softly. The store was mostly empty, a bored-looking cashier sitting behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then, my phone buzzed. My heart stopped. I pulled it out of my pocket, the screen lighting up with a new notification. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. My hand shaking, I unlocked the phone and opened the message. It was from the same email as before. "We're still watching." I dropped the phone like it was a live wire, my stomach twisting with dread. There was no escaping them. They knew everything. Where I was, what I was doing, where I was going. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The man who had been outside my apartment, the one who followed me into the building. He wasn't alone. I sat in that convenience store, staring at my phone like it was some kind of cursed object. The words "were still watching" burned into my mind. I felt exposed, like they had peeled back the layers of my life and were playing with me just because they could. I glanced around the store, feeling the eyes of the cashier on me, but I couldn't trust anything or anyone anymore. Whoever or whatever this was, they were always one step ahead of me. Every move I made, every thought I had, it was like they had already seen it, predicted it, controlled it. But there was something even worse lurking in the back of my mind, gnawing at me from the inside. The man outside my apartment wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone again, desperate for some sort of solution, but there was nothing I could do. The battery, which had been mysteriously dead earlier, was now at 100%, like the rules of reality no longer applied. I started scrolling through my contacts, looking for someone, anyone, I could call. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. These people, this forum, they had me boxed in. No call for help was going to change that. Then, the lights in the convenience store flickered. I shot up, the adrenaline kicking back in. My mind screamed, "Run!" But where would I even go? I backed up into the corner of the store, my eyes darting between the doors and the shelves, searching for an exit, any way out. That's when I saw him again. The man from outside my apartment. He walked through the front door of the store like it was the most normal thing in the world. He didn't look around, didn't scan the aisles. He was focused, heading straight for me. The dark coat, the stillness in his steps, his face unreadable. But there was something different this time. He wasn't alone. 2 others followed him. One was a woman, pale, her eyes locked onto mine as soon as she walked in. She moved like a machine, precise and emotionless. The third was an older man, gaunt and silent, his clothes hanging off his thin frame. They didn't speak, didn't make any noise other than the soft, deliberate thud of their footsteps as they approached. I was cornered. My breathing got shallow, panic tightening in my chest as the three of them moved closer. The cashier was oblivious, still scrolling through his phone like none of this was happening. I wanted to scream, to yell for help, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I'd seen too much. There was no escaping them. They stopped a few feet away from me, and for the first time, the man spoke. His voice was low, calm, like he was explaining something I should have already known. "You're not supposed to run." My back pressed against the cold metal shelves behind me. I had nowhere to go, no escape route, no plan. I was completely at their mercy. The woman stepped forward, her gaze locked onto mine, and whispered, "We warned you. We told you it would escalate, but you didn't listen." Her voice sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, like she had been expecting this, like it was all part of some twisted game I couldn't understand. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, trying to figure out how they were doing this, how they were tracking me so perfectly. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, but I didn't need to look. I knew what it would say. They always knew. The old man, silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "It's already over." My stomach twisted. What did he mean, over? I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. This was it. Whatever they had planned, whatever game they'd been playing, it was about to come to an end. And I was the pawn they had been toying with. Suddenly, everything around me seemed to slow down. I could hear the buzzing of the overhead lights, the distant hum of traffic outside, and the soft beep of the cashier scanning items for an oblivious customer. It was also normal, but I was standing on the edge of something terrible, something I couldn't see, but could feel creeping closer. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask them why, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, and my chest was tight, as if the very air around me had become too thick to breathe. The three figures stood there, waiting, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes, and then the man raised his hand. I flinched, bracing myself for I don't even know what. But instead of some violent act, he simply reached into his coat and pulled out a small black object. He held it out to me, and I realized with growing horror that it was a phone. My phone. "This is all you need," he said, his voice calm, almost reassuring. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. How could he have my phone? I had it in my pocket the whole time. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached into my pocket and my fingers brushed against something cold. I pulled it out, and there it was, my phone, still buzzing with notifications I was too scared to check. But it was impossible. How could there be two? My hand trembled as I looked between the phone in his hand and the one in mine. I felt like I was slipping, like reality itself was fracturing in front of me. "Take it," the woman said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to, but I felt myself moving toward him, my hand reaching out as if it had a mind of its own. My fingers closed around the cold plastic of the phone, and the moment I touched it, I felt a jolt, like static electricity, but deeper, sharper, like it was running straight through my veins. The moment I took the phone, the three figures began to back away, silently, fading into the background as if they had never been there in the first place. The lights in the convenience store flickered again, and when I blinked, they were gone. It was just me, standing there, clutching the phone. I looked down at the screen. It was black, the reflection of my pale face staring back at me. But then it flickered to life, showing a new message. Just one simple line. "Now, it's your turn to watch." My stomach dropped as I realized what they meant. I wasn't the target anymore. I was the observer. The phone in my hand buzzed, and this time, when I looked, it wasn't my life being predicted. It was someone else's. The first line read, "Tomorrow you'll spill coffee on your white shirt at 9:13 a.m., just like me." And I knew there was no escaping it. I paid for a life improvement service from the dark web. Now someone else is living my life. So, before I start, let me make something clear. I never thought I'd end up on the dark web. I mean, I'm not some computer genius or hacker or whatever. I don't even know how to code. But you know how it goes. Bored one night, you start clicking around, watching those creepy YouTube videos about the dark web, and curiosity just gets the better of you. I swear, it started so innocent. You know how you can find anything online if you dig deep enough? Well, I was in one of those places where the internet feels a little too quiet. No ads, no comments, nothing that tells you normal people should be there. It was like the internet equivalent of walking through a ghost town, but in the middle of the night. Anyway, I stumbled across this forum where people were talking about these life improvement services. Sounds ridiculous, right? At first, I thought it was just some self-help scam or overpriced motivational courses. But the deeper I read, the weirder it got. The idea was simple. You pay someone, and they fix your life. And I'm not just talking about some feel-good, get your life together sort of way. No. These guys promised real, tangible changes. They had people posting before and after stories, all raving about how much better their lives had become after signing up. A few people claimed they had their debts wiped out, got promotions, repaired relationships. It sounded way too good to be true, but there were dozens of posts about it, all with this eerie, cult-like tone. People swore by it. I know what you're thinking. How could I even consider it? But hear me out. I'd been stuck in a rut. My job was going nowhere. My social life was, well, let's just say that Netflix was my only company most nights, and I was living paycheck to paycheck. Something about the way those posts were written made it seem so easy, so tempting. Maybe it was the desperation, but I was hooked. So, after reading thread after thread, I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I'd lose a bit of money, right? I found a link in one of the posts, a direct access point to the service. No fancy graphics or anything, just a black screen with a form that asked for some very basic information, name, email, and a brief description of what I wanted to improve. I wasn't sure what to expect, so I kept it vague. I want a better job, better social life, more money. Typical stuff. There was a button at the bottom that said, "Submit request." My hand hovered over it for a while. It felt stupid. But then I remembered those stories. The ones about people waking up to their dream lives. Screw it. I hit the button. Within minutes, I got an email. No subject line, no sender name. Just an email that said, "Your request has been processed. The service will begin soon." That was it. No details, no instructions. I kind of laughed it off. I mean, I expected something shady, but this was almost lazy. Whatever, I thought. I'd probably just lost $50 to some scammer. But honestly, part of me was relieved that nothing had happened. I went to bed that night feeling like an idiot, and by the next day I'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. But then, stuff started shifting. It was subtle at first. I went to work, and my boss, who usually barely acknowledged my existence, started treating me differently. Like, he smiled at me. He remembered my name. That's not normal for him. Then, a week later, out of nowhere, I got a promotion. It wasn't some massive career leap, but it was way better than where I was, and the pay bump. It was good. Really good. I told myself it was a coincidence. You know, good things can happen randomly, right? But then the other things started falling into place. I'd never been great with people, but suddenly I had friends texting me to hang out. People I hadn't talked to in months were reaching out like we'd been close the whole time. It felt off, but I didn't question it. Who would? My life was getting better, just like they said it would. That's when I started noticing the weird stuff. A few weeks after the service started, I started getting this uneasy feeling, like I wasn't alone in my own life. You know when you walk into a room and it feels like someone was just there? That's how it felt, all the time. I'd come home and things wouldn't be where I left them. My coffee mug would be on the counter when I swear I'd put it in the sink. My TV would be on, but I hadn't turned it on that day. Small stuff, but enough to make me pause. I thought I was losing it. Maybe I was just overwhelmed by how fast things were changing. But then I started getting texts from people I didn't know, congratulating me on stuff I had no memory of doing. Like, "Hey, great seeing you at the party last night." But I hadn't been to any party. Or, "You really nailed that presentation at work today." But I didn't even have a presentation scheduled. It was like pieces of my life were happening without me. Like someone else was living it for me when I wasn't paying attention. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and my phone was buzzing with messages. The texts were all from my friends, asking where I was or telling me they'd see me soon. But I was in bed, alone in my dark apartment. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat up, stared at my phone, and that's when I heard it. Laughter. It was faint, but it was coming from my living room. I froze. For a second, I thought it was a dream. I mean, laughter in my apartment at 3 a.m.? There had to be some logical explanation, right? Maybe it was coming from outside. Thin walls, neighbors, something like that. But no. As I sat there, heart racing, I realized the sound wasn't muffled or distant. It was close. Too close. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, barely breathing. My bedroom door was open, and just beyond it, the dim light from the living room crept in, casting long shadows on the walls. The laughter stopped, but now I heard something else. A low murmur, like someone was talking under their breath. It wasn't loud enough to make out words, but it had that unmistakable rhythm of conversation. I crept toward the door, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. I don't know why I didn't call anyone. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I thought I was still dreaming. But I felt awake. Too awake. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards under my feet felt sharp, like my senses had gone into overdrive. When I reached the edge of the hallway, I peeked around the corner into the living room. And there he was. Someone, a man, was sitting on my couch, back turned to me, like he belonged there. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, watching my TV. Except the TV wasn't on. The remote was on the coffee table, untouched. It was dead quiet in the room now, except for the faint sound of his breathing. I tried to focus, tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I couldn't make out any features from where I was standing, but his posture was relaxed. Too relaxed, like this was his place. I wasn't sure what freaked me out more, the fact that there was a stranger in my living room, or that he was acting like it was his apartment. He didn't even seem to notice me. I stood there, paralyzed, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for him to do something. And then, slowly, he turned his head to the side, just enough that I could see part of his face. It was still mostly hidden in the shadows, but there was something off about him, like his face didn't quite fit. It was almost too smooth, too perfect, like it had been molded out of plastic. His lips were thin, pulled back into the faintest hint of a smile. But his eyes, what little I could see, were dark, almost black, and completely devoid of any emotion. Then he spoke. "You've been busy, haven't you?" His voice was flat, calm, like he was talking to an old friend. But the words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't spoken to him, hadn't even moved, but he knew I was there. He knew. "I've been taking care of things," he continued, his voice unnervingly casual. "Making sure your life's running smoothly. You should be grateful." I wanted to scream, to demand who the hell he was, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was closing up, and all I could do was stand there, rooted to the spot, as this stranger continued talking like he had every right to be in my home. "I handled the promotion, by the way," he said, glancing at the TV that was still off. "And those new friends of yours? Yeah, you're welcome for that too." He chuckled softly, the sound barely more than a breath. "But don't worry, I'm not asking for much in return, just a little space." I finally found my voice, though it came out shaky, barely above a whisper. Who are you?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he stood up, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His movements were smooth, almost too fluid, like something about him wasn't quite human. When he turned fully toward me, I finally got a clear look at his face. I don't know how to describe it without sounding crazy, but his features were wrong. Like they were just a little too perfect, like someone had taken a generic template of a person and slapped it on a mannequin. His skin had an odd, waxy sheen to it, and his smile, his smile was unnerving, like it was stretched just a bit too wide. "I'm you," he said, his voice still calm, still so casual. "Or rather, I'm the better you." My mind was racing. This was insane. None of this made sense. I was staring at a stranger who was claiming to be me, who had somehow been living parts of my life without me even knowing. I wanted to run, to grab my phone and call the police. But I was frozen. All I could do was stare at him as he stood there, smiling that eerie smile. "See, when you signed up for the service, you invited me in," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You wanted your life improved, right? Well, that's what I'm here for. I make things better, but sometimes, to make things better, I have to be you." I backed up a step, finally snapping out of my paralysis. "You need to leave," I managed to choke out. "Now!" His smile didn't falter. If anything, it seemed to widen, stretching impossibly across his face. "I'm afraid that's not how this works," he said. "You wanted an improved life, and that's what I'm giving you. But improvement comes at a cost. You get the benefits. I get the life." Before I could react, the room seemed to blur around me. My vision swam, and suddenly the man, the thing, standing in front of me wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was wearing my face, my features, my skin, my expression, but with that same dark, empty look in his eyes. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection didn't belong to me anymore. "You'll get used to it," he said softly, his voice now my voice. "Trust me." I don't remember much after that. It's like my brain short-circuited. One moment I was staring at this thing, this copy of myself standing in my living room, and the next, everything just went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor in my bedroom, my head pounding like I'd been hit with a sledgehammer. For a second, I thought it had all been some messed up nightmare, like maybe I'd just dreamt the whole thing. But as I blinked and tried to sit up, I realized something was wrong, really wrong. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It was distant, muffled, like it was coming from somewhere in the background, but it was familiar enough to send a fresh wave of fear through me. It was the sound of my voice, except it wasn't me. Someone else was speaking using my voice in my own apartment. And then I remembered. The man, the thing, had taken my place. Panicking, I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed toward the living room. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. He was talking on the phone, laughing like everything was fine, like he was me, living my life like nothing had happened. When I finally reached the doorway, I stopped dead in my tracks. There he was, sitting at my kitchen table, casually scrolling through my phone, dressed in my clothes. He didn't even look up when I stepped into the room, didn't acknowledge me at all. It was like I didn't exist anymore. "Yeah, man, I'm good," he said into the phone, chuckling. "Things have been going great lately. I think I finally got my life together, you know? I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something at him, but I couldn't move. It was like my body wasn't responding, like I was trapped in my own skin. I stood there, helpless, as he carried on the conversation, as if everything he was saying, everything I should have been saying, was normal. I'm thinking about throwing a little party this weekend, he continued. You should come by. It's been too long since we caught up. Caught up? I hadn't thrown a party in years. I didn't even have people over most of the time. It was like he was taking over my life, one piece at a time, erasing me from it. And the worst part? He was doing it better than I ever could. He sounded confident, friendly, even charming. Nothing like the awkward, introverted mess I'd been. He wasn't just living my life. He was improving it, just like he'd promised. I stood there staring at him in disbelief, until he finally hung up the phone. That's when he turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd woken up, he acknowledged my presence. "Ah, you're awake," he said, his voice calm and casual, like we were old friends, like I hadn't just caught him stealing my life. I was wondering when you'd come to. I wanted to yell at him, to demand answers, but all I could manage was a weak, "What the hell are you?" His smile, my smile, didn't falter. "I told you, I'm here to improve things. You wanted a better life, right? Well, this is how it works. I make the improvements and you, well, you get to watch. Think of it as a partnership." Partnership? I finally found the strength to move, taking a shaky step toward him. "This isn't a partnership. You're taking over my life. This isn't what I signed up for." He shrugged, completely unfazed by my outburst. "You asked for improvement. I'm improving. You didn't read the fine print, did you?" I blinked. "Fine print?" "The details," he said, standing up from the table. "You wanted a better job, better relationships, more confidence. But you didn't realize that for me to make those changes, I have to be the one to live your life. I'm the better version of you, after all. Don't worry, though. It's not permanent." That last part gave me a flicker of hope. Not permanent? So you'll leave? When? His smile widened, and something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. "In time. But you've got a lot of improvements to make before then. You've made a mess of things, honestly. It's going to take a while to get everything in order." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him, to throw him out of my apartment, but I couldn't. I was powerless, like he'd somehow taken not just my life, but my ability to fight back. All I could do was stand there as he moved past me, heading toward the front door. "Don't worry," he said over his shoulder, that unsettling calm still in his voice. "I'll take care of things for now. You just relax." With that, he left, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me standing in the middle of my apartment, my head spinning. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just sit there and let him keep living my life, but I also couldn't go outside. What if people didn't recognize me? What if they thought he was me? I wasn't even sure if I existed anymore. Days passed, and every day I watched as he came and went, living my life while I stayed hidden in my apartment, too terrified to confront him again. I started noticing more changes. My coworkers stopped messaging me. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly texting him. My bank account was suddenly flush with money I hadn't earned. Everything was falling into place for him. I tried reaching out to the service, the one I'd stupidly signed up for, but the website was gone. The forum? Gone too. It was like it had all been wiped from existence, like it had never been there in the first place. And then, one night, I saw it. He was in my apartment, sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone. But this time, when I looked closely, I saw a notification pop up on the screen. It was from my email account, an email I'd never seen before. "Your service has been completed. The life improvement is now permanent." When I saw that email, something in me broke. Permanent? This wasn't just some temporary fix. It wasn't a trial run. That thing, the one wearing my face, was here to stay, and there was nothing I could do about it. My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I felt like I might be sick. How could I have been so stupid? I'd handed my life over to a stranger, a thing, and now it was gone. I was gone. For a few minutes, I just stood there, staring at him. He didn't notice me. He never seemed to notice me anymore. It was like I was invisible, like I'd become some ghost haunting my own apartment. Watching him live my life was the worst kind of torture. He looked so comfortable, so at ease, as if he'd always been me. And the longer I watched, the more I realized no one was going to notice. No one was going to save me. To everyone else, he was me. I had to do something. I waited until he left the apartment again. He always had places to be now, meetings to attend, friends to meet up with. I didn't even know who these people were. They weren't my friends, but somehow he knew them. It was like my life had been rewritten to fit this new, perfect version of me, and I'd been erased. The moment the door clicked shut, I sprang into action. I rushed to my computer and opened my email, scanning the inbox for the message I'd seen on his phone. It wasn't there. The email had been sent to his account, an account that looked exactly like mine, but with tiny differences in the username, just small enough to make me miss it at first. It wasn't just my life he'd taken. He'd built his own, layer by layer, replicating everything I was but better, smoother, untouchable. I tried to log into his email, but every password I tried failed. My hands were shaking, frustration boiling up inside me. I needed answers. I needed to find some way to undo this. That's when I thought of the service. I had to find the website again. It had disappeared, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. I started searching for anything. Old forum posts, cached versions of the site, anything that could lead me back to them. Hours passed, my fingers tapping furiously on the keyboard as I scoured the darkest corners of the web. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found something. It wasn't the site itself, but a thread, a single thread, buried deep in a forgotten corner of the internet. It was written by someone else who had used the service, someone who had experienced exactly what I was going through. The post was simple, but it sent a chill down my spine. I thought it was just going to fix my life, but now I'm not sure I'm still living it. I see him everywhere. He's me, but he's better, and people don't notice the difference. But I know the truth. The rest of the post was filled with desperate questions, pleas for help that had gone unanswered. The user talked about seeing their double walking around, doing things they never remembered, meeting people they'd never met. And then, at the bottom of the post, there was a single sentence that made my blood run cold. If you're reading this, it's too late. Once the service is complete, they own you. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. I had hoped that someone, anyone, would have figured out a way to reverse this nightmare. But the post offered no solutions, just a grim warning. Whoever this was had been where I was, and they'd come to the same horrifying conclusion. There was no way out. I was trapped. For the next few days, I barely left my apartment. Every time I tried to venture out, I'd catch a glimpse of him, me, walking down the street, laughing with friends, living a life I no longer had. He was everywhere, blending into my world, filling every gap I had left behind. And the worst part, he was doing it better than I ever could. I became obsessed with watching him, tracking his movements, trying to understand how he'd done it. I'd follow him when he left the apartment, trailing him at a distance as he moved through my world with ease. He never saw me, never seemed to notice that I was there, lurking in the shadows, watching as he lived my life. One night, I followed him to a bar. It was a place I'd never been, but he was there, laughing with a group of people like they were old friends. They bought him drinks, clapped him on the back, treated him like he'd been a part of their lives for years. And for a moment, I felt this sick, twisted envy bubbling up inside me. I wanted to be him. I wanted to be that version of myself, the one who had everything together, who wasn't invisible. But then, something happened that changed everything. As I watched from a dark corner of the bar, I noticed one of the women in his group, a blonde woman in her mid-30s. She was watching him closely, too closely. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and every time he looked away, her expression would shift into something colder, more calculating. And then she glanced toward me. Our eyes met for a split second, and her face went pale. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Before I could react, she stood up, excused herself from the group, and started walking straight toward me. My heart was racing as I tried to melt back into the shadows, but it was too late. She'd seen me, and now she was coming for me. When she reached me, she didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, staring at me with this mixture of fear and recognition in her eyes. "I know what you are," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not supposed to be here." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, my mind spinning. "You're the original," she said, her voice so low I could barely hear her over the noise of the bar. "They warned me about this, about what happens when you sign up for the service. The copy takes over, and the original fades." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. She wasn't supposed to know. No one was supposed to know, but she did. "How do I stop it?" I finally choked out, desperation seeping into my voice. Her eyes flicked back to the group at the bar, where I, was still laughing, completely unaware of what was happening. "You can't," she whispered. "Once it's done, there's no going back." I stood there, frozen. Her words, "You can't," echoed in my head. It was like every hope I'd been clinging to slipped through my fingers all at once. The noise of the bar faded into the background, replaced by a low, cold hum that seemed to come from deep inside me. I couldn't accept it. There had to be something. There had to be a way to stop him, to get my life back. I wasn't just going to disappear. Wasn't going to let this thing take over and erase me like I never existed. "Who are you?" I whispered, stepping closer to the woman, desperate for answers. "How do you know all this?" She glanced around nervously as if she was afraid someone, he, might overhear us. "I signed up for the service too," she said quietly, "a few months ago. I thought it was just a stupid online scam. But then things started happening. Good things at first. My life got better. Promotions, friends, everything. But then..." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "Then I started seeing her, my copy. She took over just like yours did. And I started to fade." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, fade?" She looked at me with this haunted expression, her face pale under the bar's dim lights. I started losing time. Hours. Days. I couldn't remember anything, but my copy could. She was living it for me just like yours is. And then one day, I woke up and no one remembered me. Not my friends, not my family. They knew her. She was me and I was just nothing. A cold wave of dread washed over me. It was exactly what I had been afraid of. The way things were headed, soon no one would remember me either. He would become me completely, and I would be erased. Nothing more than a forgotten ghost haunting my own life. "There has to be a way to stop it," I said, my voice trembling. "There has to be something." Her eyes flickered with pity, but she shook her head. "I tried everything. The service. It's not something you can undo. Once it's done, it's permanent." I stood there, my mind racing, desperate to find some loophole, some way out. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep I was in. The life I had now wasn't even mine anymore. He had taken it over so completely, so effortlessly, that even if I confronted him again, what could I do? No one would believe me. To everyone else, he was me. Maybe there's a way, she said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the bar. But it's dangerous. I turned to her, hope flaring in my chest. Tell me. She hesitated, biting her lip, as if weighing whether or not to tell me. You have to confront him, she finally said. Face him directly. Challenge him for your life. But it's risky. If you fail, he wins completely. You'll disappear for good. How do I do it? I asked, the words rushing out of me before I could even think about them. I didn't care about the risks. I had nothing left to lose. She leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. You need to force a confrontation, face to face. But it has to be somewhere important to both of you, somewhere that belongs to you. He'll fight you for control. If you can hold on, you might be able to reclaim your life. Might? I repeated, feeling that sick knot of fear twisting in my stomach again. It's not guaranteed, she said, her voice shaking. But it's the only chance you've got. I didn't waste any more time. Without another word, I left the bar and headed back to my apartment. My mind was racing the entire way, every possible outcome playing out in my head. I didn't know if I could win. I didn't even know what winning looked like. But I wasn't going to just let him take everything from me. When I got to the apartment, it was dark. The only light came from the hallway, spilling dimly into the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The air felt thick, heavy with tension, like something was waiting for me. And then I saw him. Me, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. When he looked up and saw me standing there, he didn't seem surprised. If anything, he almost looked amused. You're back, he said, his voice calm, casual, as if we were having a normal conversation. I was wondering when you'd show up again. I stood there, staring at him. At me. This was it. This was the moment. This is my life, I said, my voice low, barely controlled. You need to leave. His smile didn't falter. No, it's mine now. You signed up for the service, remember? You asked for this. I'm just giving you what you wanted. A better life. And trust me, I'm doing a much better job than you ever did. My hands clenched into fists. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask to be erased. His smile widened, that same eerie grin stretching across his face. It's too late. This is how it works. I'm you now. I've taken everything. And you? You're just the leftovers. Something inside me snapped. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar, pulling him up from the couch. For the first time, his smile faltered, just for a split second. But then he laughed, a soft, mocking laugh that sent chills down my spine. You really think you can win? He said, his voice dripping with condescension. This life is mine now. You don't even exist anymore. But I wasn't backing down. I shoved him against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. This is my life, I snarled. You're not taking it from me. For a moment, the air seemed to shift. The room darkened, the walls closing in, and I felt this strange, suffocating pressure, like something was pushing back against me, something bigger, stronger. He grinned, his eyes locking onto mine, and I could see it now, the darkness behind them, the emptiness that had been hiding just beneath the surface. It was me against him, and the lines between us were blurring. He was trying to overwhelm me, trying to push me out of existence completely. But I held on, digging my nails into his skin, refusing to let go. I'm not done, I growled, my voice shaking with rage and fear. You're not taking this from me. For a moment I felt it, the shift. The room seemed to tilt, reality warping around us, and I could feel him slipping, feel his grip on my life loosening. His grin wavered, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. This isn't supposed to happen. But it was. I could feel it. The weight lifted, the darkness receding, And suddenly it was just me standing there, just me. He was gone. I didn't know how, but I had won. For now. I accepted a freelance job from the dark web. Now the things I've been asked to track are disappearing. I'm not proud of what I'm about to tell you, but I think someone else needs to hear this before they end up in the same mess. So, yeah, I've done some shady things online. I'm no hacker or anything, but you could say I've dipped my toes in places I shouldn't. But this is something else. It started about 2 months ago. I'd been laid off from my job and rent was looming. I was desperate, checking every corner of the internet for freelance gigs. I didn't care what it was. Graphic design, coding, data entry. I just needed cash. That's when I stumbled across a forum. It wasn't one I usually hung around, but the thread caught my eye because of how direct it was. Freelance job, data tracking. The pay was stupidly good for what sounded like a simple job. Just track a few online transactions, report back. $500 up front, $1,500 when the job was complete. I didn't think twice, clicked the link, and that's when things got weird. The link led me to a private chat room. The whole layout was basic, almost like someone built it in a hurry. A user named Zero immediately pinged me. No intro, no pleasantries, just straight to business. They sent me a detailed list of what I'd be tracking. It wasn't your typical stuff, though. These were online purchases, sure, but they weren't for anything you'd expect. One order was for a collection of old, broken-down drones. Another was for outdated server parts that barely worked. Then there was a transaction for something labeled as obsolete surveillance equipment. It felt like someone was building some Frankenstein tech setup out of discarded junk. But here's the thing. None of the addresses where these things were supposed to be shipped ever existed. I don't mean the addresses were abandoned or fake. I mean, they just didn't exist. Like I'd look up the location on Google Maps, and it'd be a patch of woods or a random spot in the middle of a lake. I figured it was just some scam, but the money was real. I could see the $500 sitting in my PayPal account, ready to be spent. I'd convinced myself that maybe this was all some elaborate prank, and these people were just too rich and bored for their own good. That was my mistake. I sent them my first report a week later. Just basic stuff. Dates, amounts, shipping locations. Zero responded with one line. Good work. Continue. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, looking back, I wish I'd stopped there. By the second week, things started to get weird. Items on the tracking list were suddenly marked as delivered. The weird part, they'd been delivered to those non-existent locations. I got curious, probably too curious, and decided to check one of the spots myself. It wasn't too far, maybe an hour's drive from my place. It was supposed to be an empty lot in an industrial area. But when I got there, the place felt off, like really off. There was a chain-link fence surrounding the lot, rusted and overgrown with weeds. No signs, no gates, just this eerie silence, like the place hadn't been touched in years. But the weirdest part? There were fresh tire tracks leading right into the lot. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, just staring, trying to make sense of it. My gut told me to leave, but my brain was still in, this is just some dumb prank mode. I took a few steps closer when my phone buzzed. It was Zero. Stop. I froze, instinctively looking around like I was being watched. How the hell did they know where I was? Before I could even think of a response, another message came through. Do not proceed. Continue tracking. At that point, my curiosity shifted to straight-up fear. I noped out of there so fast, I didn't even look back. But when I got home, something about that place stuck with me. Maybe it was the fresh tire tracks, or the way the air felt heavier there, like something was watching me. For the next few days, I kept my head down and did exactly what Zero asked. I didn't ask questions. I didn't check any more locations. I just kept tracking the transactions and sending them my reports. But it didn't matter. Things started getting worse anyway. Random items started disappearing from the list. Stuff I'd tracked just a day before, gone like it never existed. No record of the transaction, no trace of the item. When I tried to bring it up with Zero, all they said was, "Focus on what remains." Now here's where it gets really freaky. One night, about 3 weeks in, I woke up to a ping on my phone. I groggily checked it, half expecting another message from Zero. Instead, it was a new transaction added to the list. Except this time, it was different. This time, it was my address. I stared at my phone for what felt like forever, unable to process what I was seeing. My address. The same address I had used for years, now sitting on that bizarre list of transactions I was supposed to track. I double-checked, hoping it was some kind of glitch, but there it was, plain as day. My heart was pounding in my chest. What the hell was this? Who was tracking me? I typed a shaky message to Zero. "What's this? Why is my address on the list?" No response. I waited, pacing around my apartment, checking my phone every 5 seconds. Still nothing. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself maybe it was just a coincidence, some weird mistake. But in the back of my mind, I knew better. These people, whoever they were, didn't make mistakes like that. An hour passed. I was practically glued to my phone by then, refreshing the chat window, my nerves frayed. Finally, a message popped up. "Continue tracking." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a command. Like they didn't care that my personal life had just been dragged into their twisted little game. I tried to push through it, keep going like nothing had changed. But how could I? The job wasn't just weird anymore. It was personal. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions. What were they planning? And why me? The next day, I did something stupid. I tried to quit. I sent Zero a long message, telling them I was done, that the whole thing had gone too far. I said I didn't care about the money anymore, that they could keep it. But I was out. I hit send, expecting maybe some kind of threat in return. Instead, they replied instantly with something that sent a cold wave through my body. "If you leave, we cannot guarantee your safety." I froze, rereading the message, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, black and white. "We cannot guarantee your safety." It wasn't even a threat. It was a fact. I felt my stomach drop, a sick, creeping feeling settling in my chest. I wanted out so bad, but they had me trapped. I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to figure out what my next move should be. Then another message came through, this one worse than the last. "Check your mail tomorrow." I stared at that line for a good minute, my brain trying to process it. My mail? Were they sending something to my place? My immediate thought was that it'd be some kind of sick scare tactic, like a letter or a package, something to remind me they knew exactly where I lived. The next morning, I woke up with that same gnawing anxiety in the pit of my stomach. I didn't even want to look at my phone. For hours, I tried to distract myself, but every time I passed by my front door, I'd glance at it, waiting for the inevitable knock or delivery. It was around noon when I finally caved. I needed to know. I grabbed my keys and opened the door. My mailbox was on the ground floor of my building, and the walk down felt like a march towards something horrible. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, every step heavier than the last. When I opened the mailbox, there was only one envelope inside. No address on the front, no return label, just my name, written in shaky handwriting. I grabbed it and rushed back to my apartment, my hands trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper. At first glance, it looked like some kind of bill or receipt, but as I looked closer, I realized it was worse. It was a delivery confirmation. The item? Obsolete surveillance equipment? The address? Mine. I stared at the paper, my skin crawling. Was this a joke? Some kind of scare tactic? My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. They were messing with me. They wanted me to know they had sent something to my place. Something I couldn't see. I spent the rest of the day pacing my apartment, checking every corner, every window, convinced they'd set up cameras or bugs. I tore the place apart, looking for anything out of place. but I didn't find a thing. It was maddening, like they'd set a trap I couldn't even detect. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? That someone was sending me receipts for surveillance gear that didn't even exist? That I'd been hired through some sketchy job on the dark web to track impossible purchases? No way. They'd think I was crazy. And honestly, at that point, I was starting to wonder if I was. The next few days, I kept my head down and tried to get through the job without thinking too hard about it. The transactions kept coming in, though, and they were getting weirder. It wasn't just drones and server parts anymore. Now it was stuff like unmarked chemical containers, weird machinery with no clear purpose, and more of that obsolete surveillance equipment. The worst part? One by one, items from my own apartment started disappearing. At first, it was small things. A book I'd left on the counter, gone. A pair of headphones I'd tossed on the couch, missing. I thought I was just being paranoid, misplacing things because I was so on edge. But then bigger things started vanishing. My TV remote, my kitchen knives, a whole damn chair. I tore the place apart again, convinced I'd lost my mind. But they were just gone. No trace, no explanation. It was like someone had come into my apartment and plucked them out of existence while I wasn't looking. That's when I realized the things I'd been tracking, the items I was supposed to be watching as they moved through these fake addresses, they weren't disappearing online. They were disappearing here in my life. And whatever they were planning, I was smack in the middle of it. After the first few things disappeared, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just so stressed that I was misplacing stuff, right? But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The whole apartment felt off. It was like the walls were closing in on me, the air heavier than usual, like I wasn't alone anymore. I kept going through the motions, tracking the shipments, sending the reports, but every day I was waiting for something worse to happen. I even stopped checking the mailbox because I couldn't handle what I might find in there next. Then it got worse. One night, after hours of staring blankly at my laptop, I gave up trying to work and crashed on the couch. I don't know what time I fell asleep, but I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint at first, like someone scratching at the door. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the wind or something outside, but the sound got louder, more deliberate. I lay there frozen, my eyes wide open in the dark, listening as the scratching turned into something else, like a faint tapping. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like someone was knocking, but just enough to be subtle. My heart was racing, but I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was a tree branch. Maybe something had hit the door in the wind. But then I heard it. A voice. It was so quiet. I wasn't even sure if I'd heard it at first. It wasn't outside the door. It was inside my apartment. Just a faint whisper, like someone was standing in the corner of the room, barely breathing out the words. "Stop looking." I bolted upright, my pulse skyrocketing, eyes darting around the room. Nothing. No one. Just the darkness and the eerie silence that followed. I grabbed my phone, flipped on the flashlight, and scanned the room. But everything was exactly where it should be, or at least what was left of everything. I couldn't shake that feeling, though. That feeling of being watched, like eyes were on me from some unseen angle. I barely slept that night, and the next day, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to leave. I didn't care about Zero, didn't care about their threats. I just needed to get out. I packed a small bag with essentials and called a friend, Dan, to see if I could crash at his place for a few days. I hadn't told him the whole story. I mean, how could I? But he knew I'd been acting weird and figured I just needed a break. Thankfully, he agreed, no questions asked. I shut my laptop, grabbed my bag, and was about to walk out the door when my phone buzzed again. My stomach sank. I knew exactly who it was before I even looked. Leaving is not an option. I stared at the message, my skin crawling. This wasn't just some threat anymore. They knew. They were watching me, tracking my every move. I glanced around my apartment, every shadow suddenly seeming more sinister. I wanted to smash my phone, throw it out the window, but instead, I fired back a message, my hands shaking. How do you know what I'm doing? Who are you? No response. I shoved the phone in my pocket and made my way to the door, but as soon as I grabbed the handle, something stopped me. Not physically, just this overwhelming sense of dread, like if I opened that door, something horrible was waiting on the other side. I stood there, hand frozen on the knob, and that's when I heard it again. Not the scratching this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway, right outside my door. I couldn't see anything through the peephole, but I could hear them clear as day, moving back and forth like someone, or something, was pacing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to open the door, but I couldn't stay inside either. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Zero. They're here. I nearly dropped my phone. They're here? I slowly backed away from the door, heart pounding, every instinct telling me to run, but with no idea where to go. The pacing outside my door stopped, and for a moment, everything was dead silent. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then, without warning, the door rattled violently, like someone was pounding on it with both fists. I jumped back, stifling a scream, watching as the door shook in its frame. But it didn't open. The handle didn't turn. They didn't try to break in. They were just pounding, over and over. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stood there paralyzed for what felt like an eternity, my eyes glued to the door. Slowly I approached, pressing my ear to the wood. Silence. I forced myself to look through the peephole again, expecting to see someone or something standing there. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway as still and quiet as it had been before. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every noise, every creak of the building had me jumping out of my skin. But no matter how long I stayed awake, the door didn't rattle again. No more footsteps, no more whispers. By morning, I was exhausted, barely able to think straight. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever this was, whoever these people or things were, they weren't going to stop. And if I didn't leave, I had no idea what would happen next. But as I packed my bag again, ready to make a run for it, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The chair I had noticed missing a few days ago, it wasn't just gone, it was back. Right in the corner of the room, perfectly placed, like it had never disappeared at all. But it wasn't the chair itself that terrified me. It was what was sitting in it. An old broken-down surveillance camera. I stood there, staring at the camera, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like one of those modern security cams you can hide in a smoke detector or a teddy bear. No, this thing was ancient, bulky, with a cracked lens and wires fraying out of its sides like someone had ripped it from some long-abandoned facility. But there it was, sitting on the chair that had just disappeared days before. I wanted to smash it, throw it out the window, anything to get rid of the damn thing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way it was just sitting there, pointed toward me like it was waiting, almost taunting me. My skin crawled with the thought that maybe, just maybe, whoever was on the other side was watching me right now. I backed up slowly, grabbed my phone, and did the only thing I could think of. I texted Zero. Why is there a camera in my apartment? It took longer than usual for them to reply, but when they did, the answer was as cold and cryptic as ever. It's not your apartment anymore. I felt a chill run through me. Not my apartment anymore? What the hell was that supposed to mean? My fingers trembled as I typed back. What the hell are you talking about? What's going on? Again, I was left hanging, the silence stretching on so long I thought maybe they'd finally ghosted me. But then, just as I was about to give up and try calling someone, anyone for help, the reply came through. The room is no longer yours. I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. The room? What did they mean? I was standing in my living room, in my apartment. It was mine. I paid rent here. This was my space, right? But then I looked around, really looked around, and that's when I noticed things had changed. Not just the chair or the missing items from before. No, this was different, subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. The walls seemed off, like they were slightly closer than they had been before. The ceiling seemed lower, like the room was shrinking, closing in on me bit by bit. Even the light coming in from the window seemed wrong. Dimmer. Almost as if it wasn't real light at all, just some artificial mimicry, like someone was projecting sunlight into a dark box. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, hoping I was just sleep-deprived, that I was imagining things. But the more I stared, the more I realized the truth. This wasn't my apartment anymore. Or at least, it wasn't the apartment I'd known. I felt sick to my stomach, like reality itself was warping around me. My breathing picked up, and I stumbled toward the front door, desperate to get out. I didn't care what Zero said anymore, didn't care about the threats. I just needed to leave. Now I grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open, but what I saw on the other side wasn't the hallway of my building. It was the same room, my living room, staring back at me like a twisted reflection. I slammed the door shut, heart pounding. No way. I wasn't losing my mind, right? This couldn't be happening. I hesitated, then opened the door again. Same thing. My apartment staring back at me from the other side. I took a step back, my vision swimming as panic clawed at my chest. I tried the windows next, rushing over and pulling them open, but there was nothing outside. Just darkness. Not the kind of darkness you see at night, but an empty, consuming void, like someone had painted over the entire world in black. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. I whipped out my phone again, fingers shaking, and texted Zero for what felt like the 100th time. "What's happening? Where am I?" No response. I screamed into the empty room, pacing, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. There had to be a way out. There had to be an explanation for all of this. Maybe I'd been drugged, or maybe this was some elaborate prank, but every instinct I had was telling me otherwise. That's when my phone buzzed again. I grabbed it, expecting another cryptic message from Zero, but it wasn't them this time. It was a photo, and when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The photo was of my apartment, specifically the living room, taken from inside the apartment. And in the center of the photo was me, standing right there in the exact spot I was standing now, staring at my phone. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, half-shadowed in the dark corner of the room, was a figure, tall, gaunt, and unmoving. Its face obscured by the shadows, but there was no mistaking the outline of a person, or something shaped like one. I spun around, heart racing, but the corner of the room was empty. Nothing there, no one there. Just that suffocating, oppressive atmosphere pressing in on me from all sides. My phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time the figure had moved. Closer, standing just a few feet behind me. I turned again, my pulse roaring in my ears, sweat pouring down my face. Still nothing. But I could feel it now, the presence. The weight of something else in the room with me, watching me, waiting. I texted Zero, desperation clawing at my every word. "What is that? Who is that?" Their reply was almost instant this time. "It is coming for what belongs to us." I couldn't breathe. I could barely think straight. What belonged to them? What did they want? I wasn't part of this. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to make some extra cash, do the job, and move on. But this was something else. I stood there, trapped in the shrinking room, waiting for whatever was coming next. The room felt smaller than ever. My chest tightened with every shallow breath as I stood there, phone in hand, waiting for the next move. That figure, whatever it was, wasn't in the corner anymore, but I could feel it, hovering just out of sight. Zero's last message echoed in my mind. "It is coming for what belongs to us." What belonged to them? What had I done to deserve this? My phone buzzed again, and I jumped. Another message from Zero. It's time. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my ribs were about to crack. I slowly turned, half expecting to see that figure standing right behind me, but all I saw was the dim, distorted version of my apartment. Every inch of the space was foreign now. It felt like a hollow imitation, like the real world was just a memory slipping further away. Then, the lights flickered. That's when I heard it, soft, dragging footsteps. This time they weren't outside my door. They were inside, right behind me. But when I spun around, there was nothing. The sound, though, it kept moving, like it was circling me, hunting me. My head was spinning, fear clawing at the edges of my sanity. I stumbled back, crashing into the table, knocking a lamp over. As it hit the floor, the bulb shattered, casting the room in deeper shadows. My breathing was ragged now, every inch of my body telling me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was stuck in this warped version of my life, caught in some sick trap I couldn't escape. Then I heard it, a whisper, not like before. This was clearer, closer, and it felt like it was inside my head. You shouldn't have looked. I froze. The voice wasn't just a sound, it was an accusation. Like this thing was blaming me for all of this. My mind raced back to those first few days when I'd poked around the deliveries, when I'd gone to that empty lot. I had been curious, I had asked questions, and now this was my punishment. Suddenly, I felt it. Cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance, but again, nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the creeping sense of something being too close. My hands shook uncontrollably, the room warping around me, the walls bending in like they were trying to swallow me whole. Then the door to my apartment creaked open. Not the distorted one, the real one, except it didn't lead to the hallway. It led to something else. Darkness. Not the empty void I'd seen before, but a pitch-black, endless space, like the door had become a gateway to nowhere. I stared at it, paralyzed. That deep, oppressive fear flooded every part of me. But at the same time, there was a pull, a tug, like something was waiting for me on the other side. The footsteps grew louder, faster, moving toward me with purpose. I couldn't stay here. I knew that much. I couldn't stay in this thing that used to be my apartment. But stepping through that door felt like stepping into something worse. Before I could decide, my phone buzzed again. I didn't even want to look, but my hand moved on instinct. Another photo. It was me, standing right there in front of the door, staring into the void. But this time, the figure wasn't just behind me. It was standing right next to me, its shadowy form inches from my shoulder, towering over me, its face still obscured in that unnatural dark. I could feel its breath, cold and slow, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. My mind screamed at me to run, to do anything but stand there. But my body was locked in place, like I'd been claimed by the same force that had warped my apartment. Then, just as I was about to give in to the panic, my phone buzzed one last time. Walk through. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, to scream at the top of my lungs, but I couldn't. Somehow I knew I didn't have a choice. This was it, the end of the line. Either I walked through that door, or whatever was standing next to me would take me in a way far worse than I could imagine. I took a step forward, then another. The figure didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and suffocating, like it was pushing me closer to the door. My foot crossed the threshold, and instantly, the temperature dropped. The darkness wasn't just a void. It was something alive, something waiting. I took one last look behind me at my apartment, or what was left of it. The walls had warped beyond recognition, and the space I had lived in for years was nothing but a twisted, empty shell. I felt a pang of regret, not for the apartment itself, but for everything that had led me here. I'd accepted the job, ignored the warning signs, And now I was paying the price. With one final breath, I stepped fully into the dark. It was cold, so cold that my skin prickled and my teeth chattered. I couldn't see anything, just blackness stretching out in every direction. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them all around me. Figures, shadows, things watching, waiting, like they had been waiting for me all along. And then, slowly, I felt myself start to fade, like I was disappearing piece by piece, melting into the dark with no way back. The last thing I heard before everything went silent was that same whisper, soft and mocking. You belong to us now. And then there was nothing. No light, no sound, just an endless void, and me lost somewhere inside it.